It'll please the Lord this morning to give me the breath and wherewithal for just a few minutes to say a few words. I'd like to make some observations, as it were, just some points to ponder, some things to consider from Luke chapter 5 and also Luke chapter 22. I've tried to record this now 3 or 4 times, but my camera keeps shutting off, and so I'm sure that'll be a blessing to some, and perhaps it'll be best if I never get this posted, so the Lord's will be done. But we trust this morning that we can simply set forth the truth as we understand it, without seeking the approval of man nor the praise of man, but that simply that we might speak that which we feel to be the truth, and speak it, being emboldened by the Spirit, to speak it in love and sincerity. Luke chapter 5 begins this way, and by the way, it's the 8th and 9th verse of chapter 5. That's what's really bearing on my mind this morning, but I find it necessary to back up to the beginning of Luke 5. When the people began to press upon him, meaning Jesus, to hear the word of God, he stood by the lake of Gennesaret and saw 2 ships standing by the lake. Excuse me. But the fishermen were gone out of them and were washing their nets. And he entered into one of the ships, which was Simon's. Very interesting to me as this chapter begins here, the way the Lord went about his business here. Now there was 2 ships that he saw standing there. But he entered into Simon's ship. How come he didn't enter into the other ship? Because he didn't choose to. That's why. It was the choice, it was the decision of Jesus, not the fisherman, not Simon, but it was the choice of Jesus. If you want to talk about choice, here it is. It was the choice of Jesus. He entered into one of the ships, which was Simon's. You reckon that gives us a clue, a hint, as to the fact that Jesus knew what he was doing? When he entered into Simon's ship, he prayed him that he would thrust out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people out of the ship. Now when he had left speaking, he said unto Simon, launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a draught. Another little point of observation right here, just something to consider. Our Jesus did not say to Simon, launch out and let down your nets and see whether there will be a draught. Did he say that? I know sometimes that we're looked upon and we're accused of not being concerned whether what we say is scriptural or not. Lord, far be it and perish the thought. I hope the Lord will just impress upon us and upon our hearts and upon our conscience the importance of thus saith the Lord, the scriptures and the scriptures alone. And having said that, what I mean by that, if God will give me the grace, he did not say, launch out and drop down your nets and see whether there be a draught. He says, let down your nets for a draught. He was telling Simon just exactly what was going to come to pass. By whose power? By whose authority? By the power and by the authority of Jesus and Jesus alone. Simon answering said unto him, this is verse 5, Master, we have toiled all the night and have taken nothing. Nevertheless, at thy word, I will let down the net. I might be wrong concerning this, but to me personally, it don't sound like Simon was all that convinced when he said that. Because he says, well, at thy word I'll let down the net. He says, but the first thing he says, but we toiled all night. That's how come when Jesus, in the beginning here, he saw the fishermen out of the ships, they were washing their nets. They had already toiled all the night. So Peter didn't seem or sound, that is, like he was very much convinced by this. And when he had this done, they enclosed a great multitude of fishes, and their net brake, the very nets that they had been washing. See what I'm saying? Jesus knew what he was doing the whole time. This was all by his direction. This was all a display of his great power. Launch out into the deep. Let down your nets for a draught, and here it is. And they enclosed a great multitude of fishes in the net brake, and they beckoned unto their partners which were in the other ship that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both ships, so that they began to sink. What a contrast. What a stark contrast. They had just toiled all the night. They had just toiled in the hours of darkness, what I'm saying, and caught nothing. I believe Peter told them the truth right there. They caught nothing. Well, Jesus knew that already. Now here they are, that both ships were filled, and they began to sink. And when this is now 8 and 9, verses 8 and 9. This is getting down to the very crux of what's on our mind right here. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." Now, let me just say this before we get any further. I don't want anybody under the sound of this sinner's voice to think that I am setting up myself as a judge of the thoughts and intents of Peter's heart at this time. That is not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm doing. But I can, by the grace of God, tell you what the Bible itself says in reference to his falling down at Jesus' knees and saying what he did. The question is, why did Peter do this? Verse 9 tells you, for he was astonished. And all that were with him at the draught of the fishes, there it is, which they had taken. That's the reason. When he come and fell at Jesus' knees and said what he did. Now look, what he did and what he said in itself, wasn't nothing wrong with that in itself. But a point to ponder, a question to ponder, did this constitute true, genuine humility? Especially when it tells you in verse 9, that he was astonished, along with the others, at the great draught of the fishes which they had taken. Now consider this point. Even though Jesus was the very cause and the source of the great multitude of fishes, right on the heels, as it were, of them toiling all night and catching nothing, yet Peter's response to it, and again, I emphasize this now. I'm not saying Peter was wrong for falling at Jesus' knees and saying what he said. But what I'm saying, in light of what we're about to go to, Luke 22, does that in and of itself constitute true humility? My point is this. Look at the context of it. This was in response. Peter's response here, that's what it was to that which it was a response to that which his eyes could see, his hands could touch, his own nose could smell. You get my point. But ironically, I don't believe at this time that Peter actually understood just how much of the truth he was telling when he said, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." Now with that, turn to Luke chapter 22. Start with verse 56. This same Simon Peter, but a certain maid beheld him as he sat by the fire, and earnestly looked upon him, and said, "This man was also with him." Now he was sitting by the fire, but can't you imagine, as that maid beheld him and kept earnestly looking upon him, I can imagine Peter himself felt like he was in the fire as he sat by the fire. And guess what? She said this man was also with him. And what did Peter do? Peter didn't get up with a great show of bravery. He didn't get up with a great show of loyalty to Jesus. No, it says in verse 57, and he denied him, saying, "Woman, I know him not." Remember Luke 5, where he said, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." Well, I'm going to tell you, he's showing just how much of a sinful man he really was. And I want you to just consider that thought now as we get on further in this. He says, and after a little while, verse 58, another saw him and said, "Thou art also of them." And Peter said, "Man, I am not." In about the space of 1 hour after, another confidently affirmed. The chips were stacking up against Peter in every way, wasn't they? I want you to know, when it says that they confidently affirmed, that meant there was no doubt in their mind. They confidently affirmed, saying, "Of a truth, this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean." And Peter said, "Man, I know not what thou sayest." And immediately, that's the third time he denied. And immediately, while he yet spake, the cock crew. Now, here's where we want to get to in verse 61 and verse 62, and compare it in light of what we said to Luke 5, 8, and 9. All right, look at this, verse 61. Now, the third time that Peter denied, and then it said, and the Lord turned and looked upon Peter, and listen at this. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said unto him, "Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice." May I submit to you this morning that all it takes is a very turn of Jesus, as he turned and looked upon Peter, and at the turn, at the very look, the very solemn gaze of our beloved Jesus. And no, I don't believe Jesus looked upon him in spitefulness and in wrath and in hatred. I believe Jesus turned in love to him. Jesus loved him with that great love that he loved him with before the very foundation of the world. But look at the effectiveness, you might say, of the very look of Jesus unto Peter. Don't you see in Luke 5 right here, even though Jesus was responsible for them fish, why yes, he was the cause of it. Yet I want to tell you, all of those outward things, as we look and count out all of that. None of that can truly beget a true humility within the child of grace. But I'll submit to you something right now. If it takes the look of it does take the look, as it were, of Jesus, and then is brought to your remembrance, just as Peter. You see the point there, and he says, and Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said unto him, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And Peter, verse 62, and Peter went out and wept bitterly. Now I ask for your consideration. Turn to Luke 5 and see, where did he, the same Peter, ever weep bitterly over the drought of fishes? You see the point? Oh, it was a good outward display. It was an outward display of humility when he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. But that was just from the astonishment of the great drought of fishes. But I want you to know, when it comes to the true humility wrought in the soul, as it were, by the very hand of God, I want you to know there comes a time within the Lord's children's lives that we experience, as it were, the very turn of Jesus. As he looks unto us, as he looks upon us, I want you to know, and then is brought to our very conscience, yes, our very inmost thoughts, the things that we have done. Look, we all like sheep have gone astray. We all forsook him and fled. And in that sense, I'm just as guilty as Simon Peter was. Why, yes, I'm going to tell you something right now. You let a little draught of fishes come along in your life. Why, yes, we ought to thank God for it. We sure enough should. But won't nothing make you as thankful as when the Lord turns and looks upon you and brings back to your remembrance how great things he's done for your soul. Don't you see the point here? I'm so thankful this morning to be able to tell a portion of the Lord's children that you have a faithful and merciful high priest in things pertaining to God. Yes, listen, he said a faithful and merciful high priest. Why, yes. Now then, again, as we said, all of those things you might experience a lot, or you might not never hardly ever experience a great drought of fishes in the sense of the material things of this life. But let me tell you something right now, you little child of grace. I want you to know that the very truth of God is in you. You have more riches than the greatest, than the greatest king. And the greatest men of this life. Great by meaning those that have much wealth and power among men. Let me tell you, the feeblest of God's little flock, yes, they find their riches in the very gaze, in the very look of Jesus when he turns and looks at them. For therein they find, as it were, their heaven, and they're able to say, yes, they weep bitterly, knowing what they have done. But bless your soul, those tears are also mixed with joy, knowing what Jesus has done. For he hath forever perfected them that are sanctified. I'm just going to leave off right where I'm at. But like I said, I just want whoever listens to consider these thoughts. Yes, that's all it is. Just take it under consideration. But may the Lord work in us true humility while we live here in this world. And I love you for Jesus' sake.